Yo guys, the Royals W here, and I'm back with another build video. Today's video is going to be a pure Warden healer. This is a build that can be changed around as obviously healers have so many sets. There's a lot of skills that you can switch between and stuff for trials, dungeons, etc. So don't take this as a set in stone thing. Things can change, but yeah. And if you like the content on the channel, I'll be uploading more. I think the next one will probably be my Necro tank updated for update 50. But yeah, if you like the content, feel free to like, subscribe, and all of that. Anything is appreciated. And if you don't like it, then comment below what's wrong or what you think you could change. Any information is helpful. So yeah, let's get into it. All right, so we're going to start off with the race and some other stuff. So we're a Breton on this build. Personally, I chose Breton just rawly because it is probably the best class for sustain, magical wise. And obviously, having that reduction in the cost of your abilities and just the overall recovery is really helpful in a healer because you need to be pumping out heals all the time. You're burst healing people when they need it, etc. So having that recovery is really important. Moving on though to the attributes, we have all our points into Magicka. We have more than enough health with a Warden, especially with the buff as well. That Warden gives that increases your health and the group's health. We're using the Atronach Mundus Stone for even more recoveries. You can change this if you want to the ritual for extra healing. However, I personally use the Atronach just because having that extra recovery is just nice. And due to the stuff that I run on my jewelry and stuff, I will show you that later. That's why I use this. Quickly, let's talk about food options. So the main thing that I'm going to be using for most runs is Witch Mothers. This offers a line of health, recoveries for Magicka and Max Magicka. Personally, this is probably your go-to option in most situations, as obviously you want the extra health for survivability, and it's still giving you the recoveries. If you're really struggling on recoveries in some situations, you can use Ghastly Eyeball. This is obviously just a flat sustain and does not give you that health, but it does give you the extra max mag. And if you can survive without the extra health as well, then just use this. It's more than good enough for like any situation. So that's what we're using for food. For potions, there's a few options. Like you can use your basic run of the mill recovery potions if you don't want to invest in the more expensive potions. But the main ones that you would want to use if you can and can afford them is spell power pots, just because they're gonna give your heals like a buff as well as giving you the recovery. And then obviously if you have tri stats and you need the healing and stuff, then like sure slap them on if you need that. But generally speaking, spell power pots are the way to go here. Okay, so let's talk about the actual skills themselves now. So we are going to be using a pure Warden build, and I will get onto the class masteries after I go through the skills, just to talk through why we're using some of the things that we are. So first things first, we are using Radiating Regeneration. This is from the Resto skill line, and this is a really good skill. You'll probably see this on most healers, so we're running that. We're using Combat Prayer, another one that's good, given Minor Berserk and Minor Resolve. The main reason we use this is for the Minor Berserk. It means people can take off things like Camo Hunter, if they obviously have the crit. But yeah, that's why we're using that. Energy Orb, which is an Undaunted skill. This is just a sustain skill for damage dealers and tank. You pop this, they take this energy, they get resources back. So that's why we're using that. We've got Healing Springs, which gives mag recovery, is a heal over time, an AoE one, and it also procs our resto staff passive from our front bar, but I will get onto that when I get into the gear. Next, we have Enchanted Growth. I was messing around with skills here to swap out, but I decided to stick with Enchanted Growth just rawly because of the Nature's Gift passive, which has now got a buff with the class masteries. So that's why we have this, but I will talk more on this when I get into the class masteries as well. But this is a good burst heal. It also offers recoveries for anyone that's hit by it, including yourself. so that's why we're using that. Next, we have Enchanted Forest. You can swap this for Barrier. Barrier is probably a better option in most situations. However, I like how cheap this is, and it's very like situational whether you're going to be using Barrier or like anything, because you're probably going to be using a Warhorn, which I have on my back bar, but I'll get onto that. So this is kind of a flex slot. Generally speaking, Barrier is pretty good here. Enchanted Forest is alright, like it's just a big heal, and you also get ultimate back for like anyone that you heal, so it can be pretty good. But yeah, as I say, Barrier can go here if you want. Moving on to the back bar, obviously, as I said, we have aggressive horn. This is pretty much what you're going to be using the whole time, just spamming this. It's a huge damage buff when it's active, and it's just good in trials, dungeons, anything. So that's what we're running. Next, we have Winter's Revenge, which I know is a damage skill. So if people are looking at this like, huh, this I'll get more into, but it's for brittle up times. If you don't want to run this, you can put on Expansive Frostcloak, which is another skill which like you can put in instead of other things. Like if you don't need the Netch, for example, on the end, like put this on. This is a good buff for your whole group. And generally speaking, in trials especially, this is something that you'd want to try and put on. But as I say, this ain't set in stone. Like this build can change, so don't take this as like you have to run every skill that I have on my bar. Switch it around, find what you like, find what you need for the group as well. But yeah, I'm using this for uptimes on chilled and brittle. But I'll get more into that when I get to the class masteries. Next, we have Blockade of Frost. Again, applies chilled, minor breach. It's pretty good, but we're also using it for proccing Crusher on our staff. You can put a frost glyph on your staff as well if you want even more uptime on chilled and stuff, so keep that in mind. So yeah. Next, Echo and Vigor. This is for our back bar set specifically. If you're not running Powerful Assault though, and you're running say MA, I would probably take this off and put Expansive on, just rawly, because like Vigor, as much as it is a decent heal, Expansive Frost Cloak is probably gonna be better than Vigor in most situations if you're not using PA. But as we're using PA on this build, this is your go-to to proc it. Next, Bud and Seeds. This is another ground AoE, good healing, and also has a synergy attached to it. So yeah, that's why we're using that. And finally, Blue Betty, which is basically you cast this for free, and it gives you Major Brew Vitality and Sorcery, if I can speak. Um, as I said, you can use normal pots if you're using this. If you're using spell power pots, you can probably drop this if you don't care about the sustain. And yeah, again, put something on like expansive. So yeah, this allows you to use trash pots, basically. But it depends what you want to use. So just keep that in mind. Things are flexible. But yeah, moving on then to the class masteries, and this is what I'm going to get into with some of the skills as well. So we're using Tundra's Maw. This basically, whenever you apply chilled, it also applies major brittle for 2 seconds, which is a really big buff. Which is the main reason for why we are using Winter's Revenge, because this is applying chilled. You also have this, which applies chilled. That is where your uptime of this is going to come from. You can optimize more. You can use sets like Serpent's Disdain. I think it's called Serpent's Disdain. I could be slightly off on the wording of that, but Serpent's increases like the duration and stuff of things. So you can use stuff like that if you want higher uptimes on Tundra's Maw, but that is the main reason why we're using Winter's Revenge on the build, because although it's a damage skill, you're also keeping up your uptime on Brittle, so that's why we use that. Next, we have Bountiful Harvest. This is a no-brainer on a Warden healer. It's giving you and your group major heroism for 3 seconds, and also giving additional recoveries. Um, that will proc from your budding seeds, and that will also proc from enchanted growth. That is the main reason for me keeping enchanted growth on the front bar, because as it's a burst tool, it means you can kind of proc it a lot easier because it's a big burst, and nature's gift procs from overhill. So just keep that in mind. Um, you can mess around with it and drop enchanted growth and just rely on your budding seeds. But personally, I just like having enchanted growth on the front bar just to help out with recoveries for the group and just to proc this a bit easier. So yeah, these are the two that we're going to be using for the healer build. Just to quickly talk about passives. So as always, just take all of the passives for Warden. The main ones that you 100% want is definitely Nature's Gift because that is part of the mastery. So you definitely want that. And then obviously these are important as well, just because they're increasing like stuff to do with your chilled up times basically. So you want to have those. Destro Staff, obviously, take all of those. Another skill just to mention to have unlocked, because it is a good skill to have, is Crushing Shock. You're not going to use this that often, but in situations where you need an interrupt, have Crushing Shock unlocked for that. As for your front bar, your restoration stuff. Um, just take all of the passives for this. Some honorable mentions in terms of healing is Healing Ward or the other morph of it. If you're using a staff from, oh god, I forgot what it's called, Black Rose Prison, Resto staff, sorry. This is something that you'll be using to proc that, so just keep that in mind. But generally speaking, you're probably not going to be using that often unless you're using that staff. Again, light armor. We're using full light armor, so take all the passives here, so you get all of the recovery that you need and stuff. Moving on, Undaunted. I also recommend having Overflowing Altar unlocked. This is something that you can put in certain situations, so just have that unlocked. Another thing that you can use is Bone Shield. However, for me, I've never bothered with Bone Shield because I feel like it's a bit situational and there's other skills on a warden that are just like simply better than it. However, this is another option if you do want it. Take your passives for Undaunted as well for the synergy and the extra resources, and then obviously take all of these. But yeah, that generally speaking is the whole build. As I say, you can change things around, so don't take this as like a set in stone. Like you must run everything on this bar. Like switch things around, find what the group needs, etc. But yeah, I will move on to champion points now. All right. So for champion points, this is personally what I'm using. Yet again, as I say many times, this is not set in stone. If you want to change things about, feel free. But I'm using from the brink, Hope Infusion. We're using Soothing Tides and Swift Renewal. Personally, these are ones that I've decided to go with, and I found success with personally. However, as I say, if you want to run other stuff, run other stuff. This is just what personally works for me. For Red Tree, honestly, yet again, run what you want. I use Spirit Mastery because I just feel like Spirit Mastery is like a really good one to have, especially in dungeons. Because let's say both your damage dealers die, you're probably gonna have to get a quick res on one of them because the tank is gonna be occupied. So that's one that is important. Rejuvenation for the sustain. I feel like you can never have enough sustain on a healer. And then we've gone for fortified and boundless. Boundless, I think, is like a must-have on damage dealers and healers for the most part. Fortified is probably the one that I'd switch around if you wanted to. If you wanted to, I'd probably switch Fortified for either Expert Evasion or Celerity. And also, if you don't care about the res time being quicker, then just go for something like Celerity or Expert Evasion. Expert Evasion, you're getting a free dodge roll, so nothing to complain about there. And then Celerity, getting out of stuff quickly is an important thing. So Celerity is a good option there as well. But yeah, there's things that you can change around. Like sometimes I might put on celerity, sometimes I might put it on expert evasion. But as I say, things can change around, so run what you want here. And then I'm not gonna bother going over the green tree because it's pretty much just run what you want. The only one I would recommend having is Steed's Blessing, just so you're quicker outside of combat between ad pools. But other than that, I just say run what you want, especially on the green and red. But blue, also up to you. If you want to change some things, change some things. Okay, so next I'm just going to go over the gear. Honestly, I'm going to say this. Gear isn't that important. There is so many sets for a healer that you can swap in and out. Like you have things like pillagers, you have things like Master Architect, like all these sets. Rojo, like there's just so many things that honestly doing a gear setup is kind of somewhat pointless, but this is probably what I'd recommend for dungeons. With some things that again can change. So yeah, let me just go over this. This is what I run personally. So first we have Moss's Resto on the front bar. I think this Resto is probably one of the better ones that you can get. So that's why we're running that, and we're running that with powered for the increased healing and a weapon damage glyph, so we can get extra weapon and spell damage, which in turn buffs our healing. Next, on the back bar, we are using an Ice Staff or Powerful Assault. We're using Crusher with Infused. However, yet again, as I say, you can use things like a Frost enchant if you want extra uptimes on Brittle and stuff like that. But personally, I just stick with Crusher for the most part. And this is Ice Staff. I know other healers will be using stuff like Lightning Staffs. However, for a Warden with the passives, Ice Staff is the better option here. Next, we have Symphony of Blades. Honestly, I just like this for the recovery for the group. However, you can swap this out for things like Ozozans and various other sets. As I say, there's so many options on the healer that like switch out for what you want. Next, Spell Power Cure. Personally, I would argue this is probably one of the best in slot sets in the game. In dungeons, I would say like this is a must-have. Even in trials, this can be a must-have. Like I know in some situations people drop it, but like generally speaking, this is one of those sets that's like a must-have, and especially for dungeon content. So yeah, and just to go through, we're using this all in light in divines with max mag. Getting onto jewelry, we obviously have powerful assault, and this is also another reason why I don't take the ritual Mundus. I am using full weapon and spell damage glyphs with infused, which gives me a lot of extra healing that way, which then allows me to have the recovery from the Mundus. However, as I say, you can switch this about. I know some people that literally will just use recoveries on their jewelry and stuff. However, I like having it set up this way just because I'm getting the extra weapon and spell damage, which is giving me extra healing. I'm getting the extra recovery from the Mundus. That's just how I set it up. But as I say, you can change things around. Another good option for a back bar set, as I said before, is Master Architect. So that is another option. However, Powerful Assault is what I generally run for dungeons with SBC and Symphony. Um, as I say, there's so many sets in the game, so switch this around as you like. But yeah, so I'm just gonna leave this up on the screen for everyone. This is basically the entire build in one thing, using Battle Scrolls mod. If anyone is interested in that, that is a good mod to have in my opinion. So yeah, but if anyone wants to take a screenshot, I will leave this up. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video, and as I said, I will have more videos coming out on tanks and various other DPS builds. But yeah, if you liked the video, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and if you didn't like some of the things in it, feel free to tell me why, and yeah, I will catch you in the next one. See ya!